Do you anticipate that the realized price could make a massive downturn? Like pretty much it's, usually kind of flat to up, just given the way that it's calculated as kind of like a type of moving average, if you will. Is there a world where we could see it materially go down? Like, could we see realized price go down 20% of the actual realized price? Not where the price of Bitcoin is trading below the realized price, but like realized price actually go down like that? Or is that less likely just given the dynamics of the market and kind of how that's calculated?
It's definitely possible, and currently around 10% below its all-time high. It goes down or trends up based on whether coins are being spent, right? If they're like spent, I mean being moved from the last time they're moved on chain at a profit or a loss. And so obviously there's a little bit of noise in the metric, right? If I transfer coins to cold storage and then I just reshuffle them to a different, cold storage or a multi-sig wallet, and I'm not actually spending them, but it's moving, the realized price says, hey, like that's an economic spend at a profit or a loss. But kind of in aggregate, on average, it's a pretty useful tool, right? So like obviously not every spend is economic, but realized price could, in theory, go down 20%, 25% like it has in previous times. If we see a lot of still kind of higher buys, right? People that have bought at 60,000, 50,000, 40,000, a lot of these coins have already capitulated. It's why we've seen the realized price go from say 25K, which it was hovering around for a while, to now like 22. But it could still go lower if more kind of previous top buyers capitulate, right? So I think for the most part, anybody that's here and hasn't kind of capitulated or hasn't been a forced seller is kind of just in it for the long haul. That's usually why we see Bitcoin bottom. It's kind of a sunk cost fallacy to say, hey, like my average buy is underwater. I'm just gonna hold on to this thing and ride it out. Not funny enough, but for the first time ever, actually, Bitcoin's below its 200-week moving average. So what does that mean? The average 4-year DCA for like the first time in Bitcoin's history is underwater. So like just in terms of sentiment, in terms of just like historic levels of down only, we're there. We see it. Certainly doesn't mean that more downside can't happen, and everybody needs to be prepared for it mentally. But in terms of long-term asymmetry, never mind the short to the immediate term, this is going to be looked back on as one of the best times to buy Bitcoin, I think, over the next 3 to 6 months.
Yeah. And so when you start to look at maybe the on-chain metrics, things around the Bitcoin market, there's been a number of commentators and analysts who have said, look, we can do all this analysis, but the macro environment is this like hangover on it. How do you think about balancing those two, right? So the on-chain metrics are saying, hey, look, we're trading below realized price. There's been this significant drawdown. Historically, some of the drawdowns have been more. Some of them have been around this level. And I think most people, if they just were evaluating that data set, would be pretty excited right now if your goal was to acquire more Bitcoin. But the macro seems to be like this huge question mark. And so like, how do you think about balancing those two?
Yeah, so I've always kind of thought of the on-chain as like this long-term, maybe not even quarter to quarter, like year over year, cycle by cycle to cycle type framework, right? You can kind of get a general sense of when things are overvalued or undervalued. But yeah, the macro is definitely the driver. I am of the opinion that we're headed for kind of some point of singularity where you're seeing all this craziness, all this upheaval, all of this unrest, politically and socially around the world, and economically, right? The Eurozone is a total mess. The Japanese yen is melting down. The dollar is soaring higher. Credit markets are melting down. I think in terms of the equity markets, the first leg of the drawdown was all about duration, right? So yields went from basically zero to 2, 3, 3.5%. And so what did that do? It crushed the kind of the multiples side of the stock. Now equity markets, the next big concern is the consumer's been getting killed because of inflation, right? So now the earnings are that kind of are the next leg down. I think it was about duration. Now it's about earnings. So I still believe, and why I still have some cash on the side is I believe that we're going to reach kind of this correlation to one moment, right? Obviously, Bitcoin's correlated to the NASDAQ, to the S&P 500, to equity indices, and when those are down, Bitcoin's down more. And recently, when those are up, Bitcoin's been kind of just sitting flat, which is a little worrisome. But I still think we're going to see this huge, whether it's a limit down day in equities or some credit market breaking or something breaking in the currency markets. We're going to see something in the financial system break, and that's going to be the cause for a Fed pivot. I think a soft landing is somewhat laughable. And so that's why I still have some kind of buying power on the sidelines, because it's completely exogenous to Bitcoin itself. The Bitcoin network is at 100% uptime. Nothing has changed about the underlying thesis, but it's not insulated against these broader markets, right? Bitcoin's still just a drop in the bucket in terms of the global financial assets. And when the bond market's gurgling and something breaks, then the liquidity effects of that are obviously going to make its way into the Bitcoin market. So the on-chain is a useful framework for 6 months, a year, 4 years, right? It's this kind of cycle by cycle. Like, is it undervalued? Is it a little bit overvalued? Should I wait? But the macro right now is obviously the driver. And I think really every asset on the planet is a kind of a function of the liquidity tide being pulled out or being pushed, kind of pushed onto land.